In this video, we are going to talk about the new chapter, that is Indian economy. So as the name of the chapter suggests, that we are going to discuss about the situation of the economy of India, that is our Indian economy. Okay, so let's have a look on the overview of the chapter. See students, under this chapter, we will study about the status of Indian economy, or you can say situation of Indian economy under pre-independence period. That is, we are going to talk about the situation of Indian economy prior to independence period. Okay, that is, we are talking about the situation of Indian economy in the duration ranging from the year 1850 to 1947. Next, we will also talk about the status of Indian economy under post-independence period. That is, we are going to talk about the situation of Indian economy after independence. In other words, we are going to talk about the situation of Indian economy regarding the duration starting from the year 1947 to 1991. Next, we will talk about the era of reforms, that is the era of early liberalization or early reforms. Also, we will talk about the economic reforms of 1991, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization. And the most important, we are going to study about the current state of the Indian economy. So we will basically study about the situation of the agriculture sector, industrial sector and service sector of Indian economy presently. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Overview of the chapter. Status of Indian economy pre-independence period, that is 1850 to 1947. Next, status of Indian economy post-independence period, that is 1947 to 1991. Next, the economic reforms of 1991. Last but not the least, the current state of the Indian economy. So this is all about the overview of the chapter, guys. First topic of the chapter, that is status of Indian economy under pre-independence period, that is the duration starting from 1850 to 1947. Okay, so basically we are going to talk about the situation of the Indian economy before independence. So we are going to talk about the situation of pre-independent Indian economy. So let's have a look, students. Between the 1st and 17th century AD, that is between the 1 to 1600 years AD, India was believed to have had the largest economy of the ancient and medieval period and medieval world. Okay, so India was the largest economy of the ancient, that is the early history period, or you can say the classical period, and the medieval world, that is the middle period or middle age. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Status of Indian economy pre-independence period 1850 to 1947. Between the 1st and 17th century AD, India was believed to have had the largest economy of the ancient and medieval world. Next, students, India was prosperous, that is India was wealthy, or you can say rich country, and India was self-reliant, that is India was independent. India was not dependent on any other country for its food grains or for the import of fruits and vegetables, etc. So India was self-reliant, and India was believed to have controlled between 1/3 and 1/4 of the world's wealth. Okay, so let's recall it till now. India was prosperous and self-reliant and is believed to have controlled between 1/3 and 1/4 of the world's wealth. Next, what does India included? India consists of self-sufficient villages, that is the independent villages, and cities which were centers of commerce, that is the cities which were having the markets, businesses and trade going on, and the cities were the centers of pilgrimage also, that is the cities included the religious ports also. Okay, and also the cities were the centers of administration. that is the cities included the government organizations which administers the entire country. Okay. Further we have, if we compare the villages and cities, then cities were having more opportunities for diverse occupations. That is, the occupations were available in so much variety in cities as compared to villages. Also, cities were having more opportunities in terms of trade and in terms of gainful economic activities. Okay, so let's recall it till now. It consisted of self-sufficient villages and cities which were centers of commerce, pilgrimage and administration. Compared to villages, cities presented more opportunities for diverse occupations, trades and gainful economic activities. Further students, we have the division of labor was done on the basis of certain features, or you can say attributes. Attributes means features, or you can say characteristics. Okay, so division of labor was done on the basis of certain features or attributes such as race, class, gender. Okay, so division of labor on the basis of the attributes like race, class and gender was the basis of economic and social differentiation. So let's recall it till now. Simple division of labor on the basis of attributes like race, class, gender was the basis of economic and social differentiation. Now students, further we have agriculture was the dominant occupation and main sources of livelihood for majority of people. As we know that India is an agrarian economy. Why it is so? It is because most of the people, that is more than 70% of the people, are engaged in agriculture sector in India. That's why agriculture sector is the main occupation, or you can say dominant occupation, and it provides the sources of livelihood to majority of people. Further students, we have the country had a highly skilled set of artisans, craftsmen who were specialized in producing textiles, handicrafts, etc. So let's recall it till now. Agriculture was the dominant occupation and main sources of livelihood for majority of people. The country had a highly skilled set of artisans and craftsmen specialized in producing textiles, handicrafts, etc. Students, now we will talk about the period of British rule, or you can say the time period or duration of British rule or British Raj. Okay, so basically the period of British rule is divided into two sub-periods, and that is the rule of East India Company and British government in India. Okay, so first we will talk about the rule of East India Company. The rule of East India Company was from the duration 1757 to 1858. Okay, and British government in India was of the duration 1858 to 1947. So let's recall it till now. Period of British rule is divided into two sub-periods, that is the rule of East India Company, that is 1757 to 1858, and British government in India, that is 1858 to 1947. Basically under this, or you can say under the first phase of the period of British rule, it was the East India Company, that is a trading company of the Britishers, were ruling in India. But in the next phase of the period of British rule, India came under the Britain Parliament. Okay, so it was a British government which was ruling in India from 1858 to 1947. Now students need to understand something. See, this chapter is all about the Britain and India, right? See students, India was very much famous for its handicraft products, that is the handmade products, because India was having skilled labor, okay, and India was having good quality of the raw materials also. So India was able to generate good quality of handicraft products, okay. And now let's talk about the Britain. Britain was having the advanced technology. advanced technology, that is machines, tools, equipments. Okay, students. But Britain was having shortage of raw material. Shortage of raw materials. Okay. But as we know that to do the production of goods and services, the country requires the technology as well as the raw materials. So, Britain was in highly doubt that their production process will not be able to continue smoothly in the near future due to the shortage of raw materials in Britain. So Britain was in search of finding out the source of the supply of raw material to Britain. Okay. So Britain was in search of finding out the source of raw materials. Okay. And students, since Britain was having the advanced technology and good labor also, so the output of goods which is being generated in Britain will increase, right? So in order to increase the income of Britain, the Britain was searching for more consumers now. So for both, for having the source of raw material and for getting new consumers, Britain target the India. Okay. India was earlier the exporter of finished goods, right? But now afterwards when Britishers were ruling in India, India became the exporter of raw materials to Britain. Okay, students? And India was basically the importer of finished goods from Britain. Importer of finished goods, okay, from Britain. So students, in Indian markets, now there were the Indian handicraft products and the Britain machine made goods were available in Indian markets. And since Britain goods were the machine made goods, so these were available at cheaper prices in Indian markets, which gives the urge to the Indians in order to buy the Britain machine made goods which are cheaper in comparison to the Indian goods which were present in the Indian markets. So in this way, the Britain captures the Indian market in order to supply its own machine made products. Okay. So what we have recalled till now, we have recalled that Britain made India the exporter of raw material and importer of Britain machine made goods. Okay. So let's have a look, students. The advent of the Europeans and the British market, a shift in economic history of India. Basically, the coming of the Europeans and the British market in the Indian market led to the shift in economic history of India. It basically affects the India economically. See students, during the later half of 18th century, the manufacturing capabilities of Britain increased manifold. That is, the abilities of Britain to manufacture the goods increases by multiple times, and consequently it arises the need to increase raw material supply as well as to find the markets for finished goods. This led to virtual reversal of the nature of India's foreign trade from an exporter of manufacturer goods to export of raw materials to Britain. So let's recall it till now. The advent of the Europeans and the British market, a shift in economic history of India. During the later half of 18th century, the manufacturing capabilities of Britain increased manifold, and consequently it arises the need to increase raw material supply as well as to find markets for finished goods. This lead to virtual reversal of the nature of Indian foreign trade from an exporter of manufacturer goods to export of raw materials. Next students, the Britishers followed the discriminatory tariff policy. Now what was discriminatory tariff policy? Under discriminatory tariff policy, the tariff rates were charged at a higher rate in case India exports its finished goods in foreign markets. And lower tariff rates were kept if India exports raw materials to Britain. And again, lower, or you can say nil tariff rates were charged if Britain was exporting its machine made products in India. Okay. So here you can see that there was a partiality done between India and Britain on the ground of tariff rates charged on the products of India and Britain. Right? Students, here we need to note that why the tariff rates on finished goods, or you can say Indian handicraft goods, were higher if India was exporting its finished goods or handicraft goods in foreign market. It was done by the Britishers so that the price of Indian handicraft goods increases in the foreign market, which will ultimately lead to decline in demand of Indian handicraft goods in the foreign market. Okay. And now students, we will talk about the demand of Indian handicraft goods in the Indian market. See students, as I already told you, in the Indian market, now there were two types of goods. First, Indian handicraft goods, and the next one were British machine made goods. Since the Britain goods, or you can say the British goods, were machine made, so they were available at cheaper prices in Indian markets as compared to Indian handicraft goods. So Indians were now purchasing the Britain machine made goods rather than Indian handicraft goods. So the demand for Indian handicraft goods reduces in the domestic market also, and the industries that were dealing in Indian handicraft goods suffered from huge losses due to decrease in demand of Indian handicraft goods in the foreign market as well as in the domestic market. So they shut down their industries, which is called de-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries. De-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries means shutting down of Indian handicraft industries. So let's recall it till now. Discriminatory tariff policy was used by Britishers, which leads to de-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries. Now students, we will talk about the impacts of de-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries. Now due to de-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries, most of the people were lost their jobs, or most of the people were lost their work, right? So their source of livelihood was no longer more with them. So de-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries created large-scale unemployment. That is, it created rampant unemployment in the economy, and it basically leads to absence of alternative sources of employment. Okay, this basically forced the people to move towards the agriculture sector for their livelihood, or you can say for earning in order to support their livelihood. Okay. So in other words, we can say that de-industrialization of Indian handicraft industries led to large scale unemployment, and there was absence of alternate sources of employment in the economy, which forces the people to move into the agriculture sector, and it basically increases the disguised unemployment in the agriculture sector also. So let's recall it till now. Impact: large scale unemployment and absence of alternate sources of employment forced many to depend upon agriculture for their livelihood. Now students, since most of the people were now forcing to move towards the agriculture sector, so it basically increases the pressure on land. Since there was increased pressure on land, it caused the subdivision and fragmentation of land holdings. That is, division of land holdings into smaller pieces, and those pieces were scattered. This is called fragmentation of land holdings. And most of the people were now doing subsistence farming only. That is, they were producing the crops, or you can say they were engaged in farming of the food grains so that they can use the food grains at their home only. So there was subsistence farming there were no commercial farming, and it basically reduced the agricultural productivity, and hence it leads to origin of poverty in the Indian economy. Since with the increase in agricultural productivity, the income of the agriculture sector also reduces. In other words, the people who are dependent on the agriculture sector for their income will be in poor state now. Okay, so let's recall it till now. The increased pressure on land caused subdivision and fragmentation of land holdings, subsistence farming, reduced agricultural productivity and poverty. Next students, the survival of domestic industries were very difficult now. It was because of the cheaper imports of machine-made goods from Britain, right? Because with the cheaper imports of machine-made goods from Britain, Indian people were now demanding the cheaper imports of machine-made goods from Britain. Okay, they were not demanding the domestic goods. And also, the survival of domestic industry become difficult because of the shift of the taste and preferences of people towards the imported goods from the domestic goods. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Survival of domestic industries became more difficult because of cheaper imports of machine-made goods from Britain and shift of taste and preferences of people towards imported goods. Next students, the system of land tenure system, especially the zamindari system, created a class of people whose interests were focused on perpetuating the British rule or continuing the British rule. Okay, so let's have a look. The systems of land tenure, that is the zamindari system, created a class of people whose interests were focused on perpetuating, that is continuing the British rule. Now students, excessive pressure on land increased the demand for land under tenancy, right? And the zamindars got the opportunity in order to extract excessive rents, in order to charge high amounts of rents. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Excessive pressure on land increased the demand for land under tenancy, and the zamindars got the opportunity to extract excessive rents. Now students, we will talk about the industrial sector during the pre-independence era. Okay, so industrial sector of India was stagnant, that is it was neither growing nor was going down during the colonial era. Factory based production did not exist in India before 1850. Okay, so only the handmade products were produced in India before 1850. There were no factory based production, that is the production of goods were not done using the machines before 1850. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Industrial sector stagnant during colonial era. Factory based production did not exist in India before 1850. Next we have the modern enterprises started to grow in the mid 19th century. So let's recall it till now. The modern enterprises, that is the enterprises with the advanced technology, started to grow in the mid 19th century. The cotton milling business grew steadily throughout the second half of the 19th century and achieved high international competitiveness, that is high global competitiveness. So let's recall it till now. The cotton milling business grew steadily throughout the second half of the 19th century and achieved high international competitiveness. The cotton mill industry in India had 9 million spindles. Now what is spindles? Spindles are basically the devices used to create yarn from cotton or wool or any fiber. Okay, so the cotton mill industry in India had 9 million spindles in the 1930s, which placed India in the 5th position in the overall world, or you can say 5th position globally in terms of number of spindles. So let's have a look. The cotton mill industry in India had 9 million spindles in the 1930s, which placed India in the fifth position globally in terms of number of spindles. Jute mills also expanded rapidly in and around Calcutta due to rising global demand for ropes and other products which were made up of jute. Indian jute occupied a large share of the international market by the late 19th century. So let's recall it till now. Jute mills also expanded rapidly in and around Calcutta due to rising global demand for ropes and other products. Indian jute occupied a large share of the international market by the late 19th century. Now students, at the end of 19th century, the Indian jute mill industry was largest in the world in terms of the amount of raw jute consumed in production. Okay, so let's have a look. At the end of 19th century, the Indian jute mill industry was the largest in the world in terms of the amount of raw jute consumed in production, or you can say amount of raw jute used in production. Brewing is basically the process of creating beer or any alcoholic product. Paper milling, leather making and matches and rice milling industries also developed during the century. So let's recall it till now. Brewing, paper milling, leather making, matches and rice milling industries also developed during the century. Heavy industries such as iron industry, that is the industries which require the huge amount of capital, were also established or set up as early as 1814 by British capital. Okay, India's iron industry was ranked 8th in the world in terms of output in the year 1930. So let's recall it till now. Heavy industries such as the iron industry were also established as early as 1814 by British capital. India's iron industry was ranked 8th in the world in terms of output in 1930. Now students, there were some industries which reached global standards, or you can say which reached international standards by the beginning of the 20th century. Just before Great Depression, India was ranked 12th largest industrialized country measured by the value of manufactured products. So let's recall it till now. Some industries even reached global standards by the beginning of the 20th century. Just before Great Depression, India was ranked 12th largest industrialized country measured by value of manufactured products. India's industrial growth was insufficient in order to bring the transformation in economic structure. The share of NDP of the manufacturing sector, excluding small-scale and cottage industries, had barely reached 7% even in 1946. So let's have a look. India's industrial growth was insufficient to bring in transformation in economic structure. The share of NDP of the manufacturing sector, that is the domestic income of the manufacturing sector, excluding small-scale and cottage industries, had barely reached 7% even in 1946. The share of factory employment in India was very small. It was basically 0.4% of the total population in 1900 and 1.4% in 1941. So let's recall it till now. The share of factory employment in India was also small. It was 0.4% of the total population in 1900 and 1.4% in 1941. Talk about the Indian economy post-independence. Okay, so basically we are going to talk about the status or situation of Indian economy after India got independence. So basically we are going to talk about the situation of Indian economy in post-independence period, that is the period starting from 1947 to 1991. Okay, so let's have a look. Indian economy post-independence 1947 to 1991. Indian economy post-independence 1947 to 1991. See students, during independence, the literacy rate was low. Also, there was low life expectancy and there was poverty in income terms as well as in human resources. Basically, the literacy rate was 18% and life expectancy was only 32 years and poverty was seen in income terms, that is in financial terms, as well as in human resources. That is, there were no skilled human resources present in the Indian economy during independence. So let's have a look. Indian economy post-independence 1947 to 1991. During independence, literacy rate is 18%, life expectancy is 32 years in 1951. Poverty was in income terms as well as human resources. So students, India opted the Nehruvian model of development. It was basically implemented in India during the leadership of our first Prime Minister of India, that is Jawaharlal Nehru ji. Okay. So this model was implemented from 1947 to 1964. This model basically focuses on industrialization, infrastructure development such as construction of roads, dams, etc. and educational initiatives, that is focuses on improving the quality of the institutions for higher learning and land reforms, etc. So let's recall it till now. Nehruvian model of development was implemented in India during the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru, 1947 to 1964. It focuses on industrialization, infrastructure development, roads, dams, etc., educational initiatives, that is, institutions for higher learning, land reforms, etc. Also students, the Planning Commission was set up in the year 1950 in order to do the planning for the Indian economy so that the Indian economy can grow. So Planning Commission was established in order to frame 5-year plans. Okay, basically Planning Commission was set up in order to prepare the 5-year plans for the Indian economy, so that the predetermined objectives, that is the pre-decided objectives, can be fulfilled through the planning process. And those predetermined objectives are economic growth, equity, self-reliance and modernization. So basically, we Indians wanted to grow our economy at a high rate and to bring equity in the economy, that is to reduce the inequalities of income and wealth in the economy. Next, we wanted to become self-reliant, that is we wanted to become independent. We do not want to become dependent on any country. Okay. Next, we want to modernize our economy, that is we want to use the advanced methods of production, advanced machines, tools and equipments during the production of goods and services. Okay. So let's recall it till now. The Planning Commission was established to frame 5-year plans for predetermined objectives, and those are economic growth, equity, self-reliance, modernization. Next students, IPR 1948 was also implemented. Okay. Now what is this IPR? IPR stands for Industrial Policy Resolution. It was basically focusing on expanding the role of the public sector in order to grow the industrial sector of the country. Okay. Or you can say it focuses on increasing the role of the government in order to grow the industrial sector, or you can say industrial sector of India. And licenses were provided to the private sector if private sector wants to enter in the industrial sector. Okay. So let's have a look. The IPR, Industrial Policy Resolution 1948, focused on expanding the public sector and licensing to the private sector. Next students, it basically granted state monopoly, that is it granted the monopoly to the government to act in strategic areas such as atomic energy, arms, ammunition, railways. That is, the government only can come for providing the services related to atomic energy, arms, ammunition and railways. In these areas where the state monopoly is provided to the government, The private sector cannot come. The entry of the private sector in these areas are blocked. Okay. And special treatment was provided to SSIs, that is small scale industries, and cottage industries and village republics. Okay. So one of the example of providing special privilege to the small scale industries was tax rebates. Okay. Providing the subsidies to small scale industries, and there were certain products which were reserved for production by small scale industries only. Those products which were reserved for production by small scale industries only, those products cannot be prepared by the large scale industries. Okay. So let's have a look. It granted state monopoly for strategic areas like atomic energy, arms, ammunition and railways. Special treatment was provided to small scale industries, cottage industry and village republic. Next students, we will talk about the policies in 1950s were guided by two economic philosophies. Okay. So we are going to talk about the two economic philosophies on which the policies which were framed in 1950s were guided or were based. So it was based on Prime Minister's vision to build a socialistic society with heavy emphasis on industrial sector. Okay. And next, it was based on Gandhian philosophy of small scale and cottage industry and village republics. So it was basically the views of the Gandhiji that if we will develop our small scale cottage industries, then the overall economy will develop. Okay. If we want to develop the entire country, then we need to focus on developing the small scale and cottage industries. Okay. And Prime Minister's vision was to set a socialistic society, that is to set a society where all the means of production are owned, controlled and managed by the government, and heavy emphasis should be put on the industrial sector. That is, we should focus on growing our industrial sector so that our economy can grow. So let's have a look. The policies in 1950s were guided by two economic philosophies. First, Prime Minister vision to build a socialistic society with heavy emphasis on industrial sector. The Gandhian philosophy of small scale and cottage industry and village republics. Undue priority was given to public sector, which lead to slow growth of private enterprises. Right? Private investments were discouraged and had long-lasting negative consequences for industrial growth. Okay, so no one was providing any importance or no one was providing any encouragement to the private enterprises to enter in the industrial sector, okay, or to enter in the market. So the public sector was provided undue importance, but private sector was not provided any encouragement to come in the industrial sector. So private investments were discouraged, okay, and it had a long lasting negative consequences, and it had a long lasting adverse consequences or adverse effects for the industrial growth. Okay, so let's have a look. Undue priority for public sector lead to slow growth of private enterprises. Private investments are discouraged and had long lasting negative consequences for industrial growth. India followed an open foreign investment policy and open trade policy till late 1950s. Now, what is open foreign investment policy and open trade policy? These are basically policies which do not include any barriers regarding trade or any barriers regarding foreign investment. Okay, so India was following an open foreign investment policy as well as open trade policy till late 1950s. Okay, so because of no tariff and non-tariff barriers in the economy, the BOP was facing the crisis. Okay, because there was increase in the imports of goods and services in the economy and there was decrease in the exports of goods and services in the economy. So our BOP was in crisis situation. Okay, because of no barriers over the imports of goods and services, the Indian people were importing the goods and services to the large extent, which leads to increase in imports of India and decrease in exports of India, which lead to crisis in BOP. Okay, so let's recall it till now. India followed an open foreign investment policy and open trade policy till late 1950s. BOP crisis emerged, causing concerns regarding depletion of foreign exchange reserves. So as we know that whenever BOP crisis is there are issues which might arise due to depletion of foreign reserves in the economy, due to depletion of foreign exchange reserves in the economy, because we require the foreign exchange reserves in order to make the payments for the imported goods and services. So it basically leads to now implementing the tariff and non-tariff barriers. So it leads to tariff and non-tariff barriers. The comprehensive trade controls were maintained until 1966. So such type of trade controls, that is tariff and non-tariff barriers, continued till the year 1966. Next students, further we have, in the first 3 decades after independence, that is from 1950 to 1980, India's average annual rate of growth was at a modest, which was 3.5%. That is, India's average annual rate of growth was very low. Okay, and average annual rate of growth is also known as Hindu growth rate. Okay, and agriculture was neglected during this 3 decades, and the thrust or focus of the first decade and half was on capital goods and capital intensive projects. So let's recall it till now. In the first 3 decades after independence, that is 1950 to 1980, India's average annual rate of growth was a modest 3.5%. That is Hindu growth rate. Agriculture was neglected. The thrust of the first decade and half was on capital goods and capital intensive projects. Now students, the major shift in Indian economic strategy was in mid-1960s. During second 5-year plan, industrial sector was given priority. So under second 5-year plan, that is the plan which was starting from 1956 to 1960. Okay, that is the second 5-year plan. Industrial sector was given importance. That is, second 5-year plan was focuses on growing the industrial sector. Okay, and the expenditure on agriculture sector was reduced. So let's have a look. The major shift in Indian economic strategy was in mid-1960s. During second 5-year plan, industrial sector was given priority. Expenditure on agriculture sector was reduced. With continuous failures of monsoon, 2 severe and consecutive droughts struck India in the year 1966 and 1967. Due to that droughts, the agriculture sector recorded substantial negative growth, as the productivity of the agriculture sector hampered to the large extent due to the droughts in the year 1966 and 1967. So India was facing a serious food problem in 1960s. So let's have a look. With continuous failures of monsoon, 2 severe and consecutive droughts struck India in 1966 and 1967. The agriculture sector recorded substantial negative growth and India faced a serious food problem. Now students, India was not able to feed its entire population through its domestic production of food grains. So India had to depend on United States for food assistance, or you can say for food aid under PL 480. Now what is PL 480? It is basically the Public Law 480, or you can say the Food for Peace program. Okay, it was US foreign aid program that provided food assistance to developing countries like India. So let's have a look till yet. India had to depend on United States for food aid under PL 480. PL 480 is basically Public Law 480 or the Food for Peace program. It was a US foreign aid program that provided food assistance to developing countries like India. But it was not good for India to dependent on United States for food grains. So India invented the Green Revolution. So Green Revolution was required in Indian economy in order to become self-reliant in food grains. Self-reliant in food grains. Okay. So Green Revolution basically came in 1960s, or you can say in late 1960s. Okay. What was Green Revolution? Green Revolution was increase in production of food grains, mainly wheat and rice, due to use of scientific techniques such as high yielding variety seeds. Okay. HYVS stands for high yielding variety seeds. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Okay. So Green Revolution was increase in production of food grains, mainly wheat and rice, due to use of HYV seeds, chemical fertilizers and pesticides on Indian farms. So with Green Revolution, in Indian economy, there was surplus of food grains now. Okay. And now the Indian economy could have export those food generated on Indian farmlands. So Green Revolution was required in Indian economy in 1960s. Now, so Green Revolution was one of the agricultural policy used by India, right? So India drastically changed its agricultural policies. Now the government of India introduced extra stringent, that is extra strict administrative controls on both trade and industrial licensing, and launched a wave of nationalization. Okay. So government was making changes in the industrial sector also and service sector also, along with the agricultural sector. So the government introduced extra strict control measures or extra strict administrative controls both on trade and industrial licensing, and launched a wave of nationalization. So let's recall it till now. While India drastically changed its agricultural policies, the government introduced extra stringent administrative controls on both trade and industrial licensing, and launched a wave of nationalization. The government basically nationalized 14 commercial banks in the year 1969 and followed it up with nationalizing another 6 in the year 1980. Okay, so let's have a look. The government nationalized 14 banks in 1969 and then followed it up with nationalizing another 6 in 1980. Next, students, the economic performance during the period 1965 to 81 was at the worst. It is because there was decline in productivity in the Indian economy. There were 3 wars which led to negative effects on the productivity in the Indian economy. Okay, 3 wars were taken place in the year 1962, 1965 and 1971. Major droughts also occurred in the year 1966 and 1967, as we have already discussed. That also reduces the productivity in the economy. Next, there was oil shocks, that is sudden increase in price of oil in the year 1973 and 1979. Okay, so all of this would have led to economic performance deteriorated during the period 1965 to 81. So let's have a look. The economic performance during the period 1965 to 81 is the worst in independent India's history, because there were decline in productivity. 3 wars were there in the year 1962, 1965 and 1971. Major droughts were there which occurred in the year 1966 and 1967. Oil shocks were there in the year 1973 and 1979. Many government policies aimed at equitable distribution of income and wealth, and the government policies were able to attain their aim by implementing the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. So basically this MRTP Act aimed at regulating large firms with large market power. Okay. So this act prevents large firms to take any unfair measures or any unfair steps in the market. Okay. So let's have a look. Many government policies aimed at equitable distribution of income and wealth were implemented, like the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices, that is MRTP Act 1969, aimed at regulating large firms with large market power. Next, in 1967, the policy of reservation of many products for exclusive manufacture by small-scale industries. So it was done in 1967 to encourage labor-intensive growth and to allow redistribution of income by shifting income towards lower wage earners. So let's recall it till now. In 1967, the policy of reservation of many products for exclusive manufacture by the small-scale industries to encourage labor-intensive growth and allow redistribution of income by shifting incomes towards lower wage earners. We are going to talk about the era of reforms. Okay, so basically students, the seeds of early liberalization and reforms were sown during the 1980s, especially after the year 1985. So let's have a look. The era of reforms, the seeds of early liberalization and reforms were sown during the 1980s, especially after 1985. In early 1980s, efforts were undertaken to bring price stability through the combination of tight monetary policy and fiscal moderation, and a few structural reforms. Okay. Now, what do you mean by structural reforms? Some long-term changes made in the economy is called structural reforms. So, these initiatives, which were done between the time period 1981 to 1989, referred to as early liberalization or reforms by stealth. Okay. So students, as we know that the RBI uses the monetary policy and the government uses the fiscal policy, or you can say fiscal moderation, in order to bring the price stability in the economy. So in the early 1980s, whatever efforts were undertaken to bring price stability through a combination of monetary policy or tight monetary policy and fiscal moderation, and a few structural reforms were made during the time period 1981 to 1989, was called early liberalization or reforms by stealth. So let's have a look. In early 1980s, efforts were undertaken to bring price stability through a combination of tight monetary policy and fiscal moderation, and a few structural reforms. These initiatives spanning 1981 to 1989 referred to early liberalization or reforms by stealth. It basically focused on an inward-oriented trade and investment practices. That is, it focuses on having trade practices and investment practices that will protect the domestic industries. Next, average annual growth rate of GDP under the sixth plan period, that is from 1980 to 1985, was 5.7%, whereas the average annual growth rate of GDP under the seventh plan period, that is from 1985 to 1990, was 5.8%. Okay. So let's have a look. It focused on inward-oriented trade and investment practices. The average annual growth rate of GDP under sixth plan period, that is 1980 to 1985, was 5.7%, whereas under seventh plan period, that is 1985 to 1990, was 5.8%. Now students, the early reforms of 1980s broadly covered three areas, and those were industry, trade and taxation. So let's have a look. The early reforms of 1980s broadly covered three areas, that is industry, trade and taxation. Now students, further we have in the year 1985, de-licensing of 25 broad categories of industries was done. Basically in the year 1985, 25 broad categories of industries were kept out of the licensing requirement. Okay. This was later extended to many industries. So let's have a look. In 1985, de-licensing of 25 broad categories of industries was done. This was later extended to many countries. Further students, the facility of broad banding was given to industry groups. Now what is the facility of broad banding? It means that industry groups are allowed to keep the flexibility and they can do the rapid changes in their product mix without taking a fresh license from the government. Okay, so let's have a look. The facility of broad banding was accorded for industry groups to allow flexibility and rapid changes in their product mix without going for fresh licensing. In 1985 to 1986, the asset limit above which firms are subject to MRTP regulations was raised from 20 crore to 100 crores. Okay, so we already know about MRTP regulations. So the companies earlier 1985 to 1986 were required to follow the MRTP regulations if their asset limit was 20 crore. But now the asset limit for the firms that will subject to follow the MRTP regulations were raised to 100 crore. Okay. So this was one of the relaxation made to the firms in order to fulfill the MRTP regulations. So let's recall it till now. In 1985 to 86, the asset limit above which firms are subject to MRTP regulations was raised from 20 crore to 100 crore. Earlier students, some multi-point excise duties were levied. But later on, the multi-point excise duties were converted into a modified value added tax. Okay, which is represented by MOD-VAT, which significantly reduces the taxation on inputs, that is the taxation on raw materials and associated distortions. So let's recall it. The multi-point excise duties were converted into a modified value added, that is MOD-VAT tax, which significantly reduced the taxation on inputs and associated distortions. Now students, the SEBI was established, or you can say the SEBI was set up. Okay. Now what does SEBI? SEBI stands for Securities and Exchange Board of India. It was basically set up on 12th April 1988 through a resolution of Government of India. And it was set up as a non-statutory body. Okay. So let's have a look. Establishment of SEBI, that is Securities and Exchange Board of India, as a non-statutory body on 12 April 1988 through a resolution of Government of India. Also students, the Open General License, that is OGL list, was steadily expanded and the number of capital goods items included in the OGL list expanded steadily, reaching 1329 in April 1990. Okay. So what is the Open General License list? It is basically the list of those industries which are exempt from taking the license from the government. Okay. So the Open General License list involves the names of those industries which can start the industry, expand the industry or diversify the industry without taking license from the government. Okay. And the number of capital goods items included in OGL list was increased, reaching 1329 in April 1990. So let's recall it till now. The Open General License, that is OGL list, was steadily expanded. The number of capital goods items included in the OGL list expanded, steadily reaching 1329 in April 1990. Also students, several export incentives such as export subsidies were introduced and increased, or you can say expanded. So let's have a look. Several export incentives were introduced and expanded. The exchange rate, or you can say the foreign exchange rate, was set at a realistic level which would help in increasing the exports of the country and reducing the pressure on foreign exchange reserves needed for imports. So let's have a look. The exchange rate was set at a realistic level which helped expand exports and in turn reduced pressure on forex needed for imports. Next, the price and distribution controls on cement and aluminium were entirely abolished or entirely eliminated. The budget for 1986 introduced policies of cutting taxes further and liberalizing the imports and reducing the tariffs on imported goods. So let's have a look. Price and distribution controls on cement and aluminium were entirely abolished. The budget for 1986 introduced policies of cutting taxes further, liberalizing imports, and reduced tariffs. However, the growth performance of the economy was affected adversely due to structural inadequacies and distortion. So let's have a look. However, the growth performance of the economy was affected adversely due to structural inadequacies and distortion. Next, due to excessive government controls and public sector reservations in certain industries, there is less incentive for the private sector to invest in the market. So the private sector investments were exhibited, or you can say were reduced due to excessive government controls and public sector reservations. So let's recall it till now. The private sector investments were inhibited due to excessive government controls, public sector reservations. Next, also due to reservation of goods to small scale sector or small scale industries, as well as excessive price and distribution controls, the private sector was discouraged for making investments. So let's have a look. Also due to reservation of goods to small scale sector as well as excessive price and distribution controls, the private sector was discouraged from making investments. Now students, we have the public sector which lead the manufacturing and service sector was facing difficulties continuously due to inefficiency government controls and bureaucratic procedures, okay, like red tapeism. Despite of the fact that public sector is big in size and it enjoys monopoly in certain areas, but still its performance is not far satisfactory. The public sector do not able to create good amount of revenue. So let's recall it till now. The public sector which led the manufacturing and service sectors was facing difficulties continuously by inefficiency government controls and bureaucratic procedures. Despite of the fact that public sector is big in size and enjoyed monopoly in certain areas, their performance was not satisfactory. The MRTP had many restrictive conditions creating barriers for entry, diversification and expansion for large industrial houses. So indirectly, MRTP creates the barriers for entry, diversification and expansion for large industrial houses. So let's have a look. The MRTP had many restrictive conditions creating barriers for entry, diversification and expansion for large industrial houses. For protecting domestic industries, import controls are levied by the importing country in the form of tariffs, quotas and quantitative restrictions. Okay, and there is no permission given to foreign investments. So foreign investments are not allowed. So for protecting domestic industries, import controls in the form of tariffs, quotas and quantitative restrictions were levied. Foreign investments were not allowed. Liberalization in the 1980s, that is the early liberalization, served as the foundation, or you can say base, for the more universal and organized reforms that occurred in 1991. So basically I'm going to talk about the LPG policy, liberalization, privatization and globalization. So let's have a look. The liberalization in the 1980s served as the necessary foundation for the more universal and organized reforms of the 1990s. Now students, we will talk about the economic reforms of 1991. Okay, so India embarked a bold set of economic reforms in the year 1991 under the Narasimha Rao government. Okay, so let's recall it till now. The economic reforms of 1991. India embarked on a bold set of economic reforms in 1991 under the Narasimha Rao government. Now, what were the factors that caused the need for economic reforms in India? So, need for economic reforms. See students, the India was in financial crisis. The government of India was having huge fiscal deficit, which was financed by huge amounts of domestic and external debt. Okay. And our BOP was in adverse situation as our imports were greater than our exports. And also due to huge fiscal deficit on the government is having huge interest burdens also. So let's recall it till now. Need for economic reforms. Huge fiscal deficit was financed by huge amounts of domestic and external debt. Adverse BOP account. Next, huge interest burdens. Also, there was sudden increase in oil prices or surge in oil prices due to Gulf War in 1990, and it created a severe strain on balance of payments. Also, the India was having low foreign exchange reserves, which was about $1.2 billion, which was barely sufficient for making the payment of 2 weeks only. So let's recall it till now. The surge in oil prices due to Gulf War in 1990 and severe strain on balance of payments. Low foreign exchange reserves, that is $1.2 billion, which was barely sufficient for 2 weeks of imports. Now, tightening of import restrictions by the countries at that time created the difficulties in importing the essential goods even. So let's recall it till now. Tightening of import restrictions leading to difficulties in importing essential goods. Now students, due to the adverse situation or due to adverse financial situation, India approached IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, for availing the loan of $7 billion. But IMF agreed to provide loan only on one condition. IMF wanted India to become an open economy from the closed economy. So to avail loan, economic reforms were introduced in India, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization was introduced in India in order to make an Indian economy a open economy. So let's recall it till now. Due to adverse situation, India approached IMF for loan of $7 billion. Then IMF agreed to provide loan on a condition, that is to make India an open economy. So to avail loan, economic reforms were introduced. Next, we will talk about the crisis of confidence. See students, whenever there is fragile political situation along with economic crisis increases, basically whenever there is damage, fragile means damaged political situation along with economic crisis occur in the economy, then it leads to crisis of confidence. So basically, whenever the economic crisis occur and along with that there is damaged political situation going on in the economy, then it is called crisis of confidence. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Crisis of confidence. The fragile political situation along with economic crisis increases, which is called crisis of confidence. Now students, we will talk about economic reforms in details. See, economic reforms introduced in India in the year 1991. Basically, liberalization, privatization and globalization were the elements, or you can say the components of economic reforms. Okay, so let's recall it till now. Economic reforms. Economic reforms introduced in India in the year 1991. Liberalization, privatization and globalization are basically the elements of economic reforms. Economic reforms also refers to NEP, that is National Economic Policy. Now students, we will talk about the objectives of economic reforms. So objectives of economic reforms was to convert highly controlled economy, that is a socialistic economy, into market friendly or market oriented economy. Okay. So the objective of economic reforms is to convert highly controlled economy into market friendly or market oriented economy. Also, the objective of economic growth is to bring macroeconomic stabilization by reduction in fiscal deficit. So let's recall it till now. Objectives of economic reforms: to convert highly controlled economy into market friendly or market oriented economy. Macroeconomic stabilization by reduction in fiscal deficit. Now students, we will talk about the NEP policies. So measures included under NEP policy are divided into two. First is stabilization measures, another one is structural measures. So stabilization measures are basically the short-term measures which is used in order to bring the price stability in the economy or in order to bring the stabilization in the economy. And structural reforms or structural measures are basically the long-term measures. Okay. So these are basically liberalization, privatization and globalization.